Mary Hennen is the Assistant Collections Manager of Birds and the Director of the Chicago Peregrine Program at the Field Museum. Mary has been working with the bird collection for over 30 years. Outside of the bird collection, Mary's focus has been on peregrine falcons. As recently as the 1960s, peregrines had been extirpated east of the Rockies. These losses were primarily due to the loss of habitat, egg collecting, hunting, and organochlorines such as DDT. It was through studying peregrine eggs that scientists discovered DDT and its byproducts interfered with calcium production in females, causing them to lay thin eggs. Thankfully, through diligent work, the peregrine population has bounced back. The bird was removed from the federal endangered species list in 2000. The Chicago Peregrine Program now directs its focus towards monitoring peregrines in Illinois. Mary will speak about the peregrine's remarkable recovery and what it means for us to live in proximity to this incredible bird. With that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you very much. Microphones freak me out and I talk a lot. So if I wander away from it, you could just wave me back to the microphone if you can't hear me. But so thank you for letting me come to talk about peregrines. I think they're the best bird ever, but I'm only slightly biased in that opinion. And I'm not one of those technically. In fact, I can't, he's doing it with the finger. I have to have the old mouse. You're lucky I didn't breed slides because I can go back to, I could do a whole program with my slide carousel for you. Anyway, I think most of you as birders know the peregrine story, but let's just do a little bit of the history and remembering of that. And then we can walk through a nesting season and see what's going on. And then I'll sort of try to wrap it up with some of the research and the things that we're looking at. Okay, enter. Once I find it. Not my keyboard, I have an excuse. No, it didn't. Yeah, so what did you hit? Yep, woohoo. All right, I have some study skins in the back so you could look at peregrines up close, but you guys being birders sort of knowing this. We're talking about a mid-sized raptor that's roughly the size of the crow. It's a species that exhibits reverse sexual dimorphism, which is just a fancy way of saying that the girls are bigger than the boys. You can see that in the pair that are together, the females in front. A male peregrine's called a tiercel. It means a third. He's a third smaller. Not a third of the size, but a third smaller. Plumage, you're going from in the immature, the one on the left that's brown with vertical streaking. The adults are the slate gray back with the light barring on the front. And you're talking about a cliff dwelling bird that's on every continent except Antarctica. I don't know. I'm sure all of you guys remember when you see your first a different species. The first peregrine I ever saw was this one. 1988, her name was Harriet. She was the first breeder in Illinois after the decline. We were near the Sears Tower and she stooped, which means that diving on a yellow-bellied sapsucker. Kids love the diving and the speed. So they're a species known that they go for diving over 200 miles an hour when they're catching prey. So the majority of the hunting is other birds in the air and while in flight. If we go back to that time, and I don't know if any of you guys are eBird listers and that, I love eBird as a way of looking like, use it as an indice of how populations have changed or how things come and go and how species might move. If we look at eBird and we look for sightings in the 1960s and the 70s in this area, this is what you get. There's no bullets, there's none around. It was briefly mentioned in my intro, so I don't have to go too much into the decline, but you had a species that was almost wiped out due to DDT. So in the 1960s, the North American population was down to 11% of what historically was here. They were extirpated in the Midwest and the eastern part of the US, which meant you had no breeding pairs in that area. and they were declining worldwide. I love them as an illustration of the importance of using and saving natural history collections. You mentioned I'm the assistant collection manager for birds at the Field Museum. We didn't know that eggs collected or whoever collected them in the 1800s didn't know that years later they were going to help us understand something catastrophic going out in the environment. So when you had none in these areas and very few left nesting, in the western part of the US where you had them trying and they were failing, scientists collected those fragments, went to museums, including the field museums, measured them and said, wait a minute, these egg shells are so much thinner than your old eggs in the collection. What's causing it? And now we know it has to do with that whole inhibit calcium production in the female. It's so a thin egg, it's literally the weight of the adults trying to incubate them that was destroying them. In area, is there a way to get rid of this stuff across the pictures? Did I hit something? It just comes up. Does it bother you? If it doesn't bother you, I'll just, okay, there we go. Yay. So where you still had birds in the nest, you could rappel down to those eyries, put out fake eggs to keep the adults incubating, take the eggs safely, hatch them in an incubator, and when they're 10 days old, you can put them back. But that doesn't help in our area in the Midwest. And the answer had to do with, I'm back to the not being. Okay, sorry about that. It had to do with being able to breed them in captivity. And it was falconers who had the stock that we used. The key thing is that these birds can learn how to fly and hunt on their own without adults showing them what to do. As long as we don't screw them up and show them that we're the ones feeding them and do that whole imprinting on it, you could use those techniques, hacking, and that's what you're releasing into the wilds. Example of this is the type of site. This is up at Illinois Beach State Park. So it was one of the sites. We would get the young all about the same age, about a week before fledging time from the breeders. The Raptor Center in Minnesota did the coordinating. They fly them down to us. You can put them in this hack box. That little white chimney on top of the box is a delayed feeder. So I could put the quail in there, close the lid, slide open a panel, and there was a hole in the roof and it would rain food without them ever seeing me handing them quail. When it got ready, you had them in there for a week with the front closed with the bars in the front, and then it gets time to open it up. So there's a little trap door, which is what you're seeing behind the pool and that. So we would grab them up one at a time. We tend to put a little spray paint or something, which was non-toxic. It usually was gone after the first rain, but it was an easy way to identify each individual. So I know that they came back to the hack site and that they fed and that. You put them all in that hidey hole, you put a couple days food out, then you go down and sit on your chairs away and you spring a trip door and they're out in the wild. They're gonna be 3 weeks learning how to fly and hunt on their own. When you start seeing behaviors like they drag the food away from the site, or they would grab a branch on a tree and start plucking it like they caught their own. You feed them a little less and less, just like a parent would, and eventually they disperse and they're going out in the wild. A thing to keep in mind is that any release at a particular site, like this one in Illinois Beach State Park, was not so that I had peregrines breeding at Illinois Beach State Park. It wasn't, you stay, you breed, you know, whatever you would command to your dog. It was you're helping a regional basis. And the idea was, the hope that was they would reclaim all those natural cliff iris. This is an actual one in Minnesota. Here, what am I doing that? Oh, you latecomers. Okay. Oh, there we go. So they did go back and use the cliffs, but they also started showing up in cities. And when you think about it, the city is nothing but a pseudo cliff, ample prey in all our migrant and resident birds, no competition for use of all those building ledges are just like another cliff ledge. And if you look at Lake Michigan and you follow the cities that are down there, Sheboygan to Milwaukee to Chicago to East Chicago and to Gary, Indiana, that's where you started seeing them show up in the Midwest. That adaptability to the urban environment is what speeded up that recovery. We had no peregrines from 1951 to 1987 in Illinois. And now we're past historic levels. 40 years is really not that long of a time period when you think about it. All right, this is where the first pair showed up, and that's Harriet. So she was the first breeder I saw. I get a lot of questions of, well, are they on the tallest building? Can I get them over here? My building's taller than yours. It's not the height of the building, it's the architecture of the ledge. They want to be on the side, not on the roof. Is that ledge, does it have, if she's laying down, a clear view of her surrounding area? If you think of a window well or something that is really deep and your only view is directly up, they're not going to use that. They're too vulnerable that way. So you want the lower or the no edge lip to the edge. Is it out of prevailing winds? Something, all those sort of features fall into it. We're traveling around the city, by the way, in this tour, in this talk. So you're now near the Sears Tower. You're right next to the Sears Tower or Willis. At that time period when, so we're in the late 80s, when we had the first ones coming to breed, the territory size was somewhere, I would always say, between 5 to 10 miles. Because of the bands on the legs, I could identify an individual bird. So I know that this particular bird was holding from Irving Park all the way to north of Hollywood. And the top bullet was the breeding thing. We just would see that pair on these other ledges. Let's jump forward in time. So those first breeders, their young becomes the next stop and or stocked into your breeding and have generation after generation that's going on. So you jump another, 10, 15 years, and here's eBird again, and you see that following the lakefront and how they're sort of filling in. Let's jump forward another 20 years, and that's last year, we're hip deep in peregrines, which is yay. Territory size, and another equivalent. If I'm looking at where they are nesting in Illinois, instead of that 5 to 10 miles, I have 6 pairs nesting in 1 square mile. I literally have a pair that are across the street from the other. But if I'm on this side of the street, I hunt in that area. And Rob's over there and he hunts in there. They figure this out. They work it out. It's nowhere a component that a human is saying, no, you go over there. It's something about the ledges and they'll work it out. There is the map you see on the right. If people say, where can I go to see a peregrine? On my website, and at the end of the talk, there will be the website link up. But there is a Google map that I have. So you can click on all those bullets and it'll tell you the latest breeding information and it'll get you in the neighborhood. It's not exact because I don't want people to be able to knock on the door and say, I want to see your peregrines, or you can't go on the ledge. I've had people, very well-meaning people, go in and yell at the people in the building because they had to work on something on their air conditioning or something, and they had talked to me and worked it out, but they just saw the conflict. And so my job, think of me as a liaison or an ambassador for the peregrine, is to help people live in proximity, to explain it and sort of be that middle ground. All right. And here's another nice illustration of the not releasing them so they stay right there. If you look at the origin of all our birds that have been breeding in Illinois, that's what the map is at the top with all those birds. You can really see this regional basis and this regional movement and that. And the graph on the bottom just shows that the majority of ours are migrating down from Wisconsin. I'd go up north, but that's just me. Yeah. All right, so we talked about the problem and population's up and doing fine. Let's actually walk through a nesting season and see what that involves. This is usually, and I get a lot of finding them, is from people emailing, I saw a peregrine, here's the picture and that. And I would look at this one and say, wow, it's beautiful, thanks, and dramatic, but that's not the photo I want to see. This is the photo I want you guys to send me. is these. If the leg bands are in focus, I'm the happiest camper going because those are unique to the individual. I can tell you where it came from, how long it's living. We can learn about different behaviors. Like I had a female that was holding 2 territories. That's very unusual. Normally, if you have a male having an extra pair, it's a male doing it because the female's, tending the nest. This was a female that was holding and crossing other territories to hold 2. But we could only learn that sort of interesting behavior by being able to read the bands. And every spring, every year, I need to re-identify who these are. I have a clue and I hope it's the same one back or whatnot, but every year we need to be able to see this. This is just another way of looking at those bands. There's a website on the Midwest Peregrine Society page that if you get a photo, you can plug in the bands and then it will help look up who that is for you. I would encourage you to let me know too, because then I could record it. But so you can have different colors, you can have letters, you can have numbers. They could be vertical, they could be horizontal. Generally, all of us in the Midwest put that band on the left leg. So remember, you're taking peregrine photos, you want to zoom in on the left leg and you want to make sure the band is clear. All right. We're courtship time. We're talking February, late January, February into March. Our adults tend to stay here all year, but they're not tied to that natal building that they will nest on. And the winter territories could range out and move slightly away from that natal one. So it's February, March. I want to key in where they are. Courtship behaviors, you can have bowing on ledges and vocalizations. You would have scrape building, which is their nest. That's part of courtship, and that food exchanges, that sort of thing. We see the first eggs and now here's an old person statement. When I started 40 years ago, it was beginning of April. I expected the first eggs to be seen. Now it's by mid-March. This year, 2024, we had an early dry spring. I beat my earliest egg by 10 days. So it was in the second week of March, the first egg was showing up. And the scrape is nothing but a depression in whatever substrate's on that ledge. So they don't bring in material. What you end up seeing is this roughly chicken-sized rusty egg laying on a ledge. They'll lay 1 egg every 24 to 48 hours, but they don't really start incubating till the clutch is nearly complete. So that might be on the 3rd egg. If the second one's out there and it's horrible cold weather, they might sit over it a little bit, but it really starts towards the end. And this is how we sometimes find the eye-ring. It's because, oh, I see this bird, it's sick, it's laying down. Well, it's not laying down. What it is incubating eggs. Male and females will both incubate. All right, so we're sitting on eggs throughout March. This is often the time. Here's it's great that the population is up and we have so many birds, but it means all the territories are occupied and we see more of this. This is from our webcam in Rockford. And we had you have a floater population of peregrines wanting to take over territories and try to butt in on a place. So the most time, or the time of year that I see the most injured adults is this March, April, the trying to set up your territory and trying to breed. So you can count 3 peregrines. Well, they chase that one off. And I might say that Sinisippi Audubon up in Rockford hosts this website and monitors these pair. They're a great group of people. This was an interesting one. I get, if you were to ask me, are we done with snow? If peregrines have not laid eggs, then my answer is no. Back to that being so old. In 40 years, there's only been 2 years that it hasn't snowed after peregrines have laid eggs. This is a bit extreme. We're still on that Rockford ledge. We got a lot of calls about this of why aren't you taking that snow away? The male is sitting there on the eggs. Female is on the window. They took turns. She actually laid an egg in that pile in that snowstorm and that. But to answer that question is, I can do more harm by trying to interfere instead of just letting it go. First, snow is very incubating. It's not like rain that will get you wet. It's going to insulate you. Incubating wasn't the right word. Insulating is the word I want. It's going to protect you from that cold and the wind. If I was to go and help anyway, odds are that they would either knock all that snow onto the eggs, or me trying to knock the snow away would go onto the eggs. Now you've just made the eggs wet and cold, whereas if I leave them alone, they're doing the job of keeping them dry. It's a difficult thing to watch. So keep in mind when you watch any kind of wildlife webcams, nature can be hard at times. But I might say she laid her 5th egg, 4 of them hatched. They raised a great brood. This to me is the saddest peregrine picture in the world. Here's one where the problem is rain. They're in gutters. And if you think about, I described the architecture of a ledge that they like, that describes a gutter. It's on the side. She can see all around when she lays down in the gutter. You're protected a little bit from the wind. The problem is drainage and rain coming through. She could be trying to keep eggs warm from the top, but if they're sitting in a pile of water, it's not going to do any good. Unfortunately, at this site, there was no way for us to open the window and try to retrieve the eggs or make it dry or help her out. Peregrines only do 1 brood a year, but if it fails in something like this, she did re-nest and raise young. So that was on the plus side. Behavior-wise, from the 2 adults at this time when they're incubating, here's an advantage of the female being the bigger. She's the bigger defender of the nest. When they're on eggs, she's not going to budge. If I'm walking up to an ivory or to eggs and I see the bird take off, that tends to be the male. If it's a female, she tends to stay there and budge. I was measuring eggs to look at inbred pairs versus non-related pairs, just to see if there was size difference or anything, and there wasn't. And this was one mad mama. Now we've sat on a month. We're now in April, and that because they delayed incubating, they tend to all hatch together or within a day or so of each other. Usually if I see an egg left over, it's likely the first one laid, sometimes because that's the one that was out in the cold and not incubated first. The behavior of the adults, that aggressiveness just kicks up 100-fold as soon as they have young. Then she's no longer going to stay on the eggs. She's going to come at you. How many of you guys have been bopped in the head by a red-winged blackbird? Peregrines are going to do the same thing. And see how she's almost got, this actually his name is Huff, his foot in a fist. What they do and what the red wing does is when they fly by you, they drop that first and they just smacking you with their knuckles and that. Only the females, or for the most part, the females do 99% of this behavior, which is called brooding. So the young at this age in the first week, they can't thermoregulate. So they need to tuck under her to keep warm in the cold weather in the evening. If the sun is that hot, she's going to shade them in that. If I told you that peregrines normally breed at 2 years, what's wrong with the picture on the left? It's immature plumage. Back early on, when you had very few territories occupied, we could see a lot of 1-year-olds breeding because there wasn't the competition to use it. Now it tends to be they're 3 or 4 years old before we finally see them take out territory. It's same at the other end of the age spectrum. I would have breeders that were in the 16, 17-year-old. Peregrines captivity can live up to 20 years. Now, by the time they hit 14 or 15, those younger birds are just out competing them for the sites. Males will do most of the hunting for the family, and they will cache food, which means they'll catch extra and tuck it into places. Here you're at the Uptown Theater, tucking in the red-winged blackbird. Now, sort of at mid-May. So chicks are about 21, 24 days old. They're perfect age for me to band them. Physically, they're as big as they're going to get. So I don't have to worry about that leg outgrowing the band, but see, none of the flight feathers are coming in. That brown little edge, that's the flight feathers starting to come in. I don't have to worry about prematurely fledging them out of the nest. So if we have access, and not all sites are accessible. But if we have access, we're going to grab them. If there was any risk that the adults wouldn't take them back, we wouldn't be doing this. Banding is a luxury. But because they will, we'll take care of them and take them back. We can learn so much from adding those bands and what we can do during banding. And then this is my favorite work picture. I'm in the front. My boss is the one behind me. You've got John Bates in the black, who's a curator of birds, and then Dylan Maddox, all protecting me, and it looks silly with brooms. They want to hit the high point. So you either get I see a couple tall gentlemen, you get the tall buddy to go with you, or you use the broom and you invert the whisk broom so that they hit the bristles and they can safely go through that and not hurt you. You're not swooping at them or sweeping at them. You're just making sure that that stays between you and them. Does it always work? Well, no, sometimes they sneak through, and this is my boss, Ben, getting banged in the head. I say you're not a true peregrine worker until you've been banged in the head once. The level of aggressiveness varies. The female that I just showed you in the previous site, this is the same site, but the female before her. And while she was aggressive, she would land when I would go to grab the young. And my colleague Stephanie there is just able to keep that broom distant, and she's not going to do anything. This female that popped Ben in the head, the minute you walk out the door and go on the roof, she's on you all the way out and all the way back. Protective, very protective. Now, chicks don't have that defense, but they know they have razor sharp talons. So if they flip on their back, they can do what is called footing. They're just trying to grab you with that sharp foot. It's an easy way to grab them, actually. You just put out your hand, they're going to grab at it, and you can just scoop them up. We have an opportunity at some, because of that level of aggressiveness of females, and that is to actually get a hold of some of the females. So if they're unbanded, like the slide on the left, we're at UIC, and she was literally wanting to climb up you and swat out you, climb out the window. So all I had to do was put a net, and she was on it. I can bring her in. We were able to band her. So now I can start tracking how much longer she's there. And also the same thing, the picture on the right, some of the females you're able to just hand grab. So I'm going to hang on to her, and then my colleague can safely go get those chicks and do whatever work needs to be done. And then when he's done, then we can let her go. So she's not striking us, and we sort of just hold her out of the way for a little bit. But this year I lucked out. I was able to grab 3. All right, why we have them in hand, what are we doing? Well, the upper right one, we're putting those bands on. Fish and Wildlife Services band is very tough to read. It has 9 digits. So we use that auxiliary, that extra marker. That's on the left leg. Remember, we're photos, left leg, parents. Why they're in hand, we're gonna, the bottom right picture, we're gonna draw a little bit of blood. That card you see with all the dots, it's a card that's been preserved with the fixative, so it immediately preserves the blood as soon as you put the dot on. It's like pinpricking your finger for a little sample. And we use a capillary to get that out, put it on the card. I can look at genetics. I can confirm the sex of the young. I could look at blood-borne parasites and see what they're carrying. Think of it as now another library book on a shelf that people can use to study. Another instance, the one on the left, we were looking at ectoparasites, so the feather mites and ticks, and what are they carrying? And so an entomologist was interested in. You want to study as much as you can while you have that opportunity to have them in hand. And then you're going to put them back in the nest and go from there. So this one's back in the nest, and we're now jumping forward. We're about 30 days old. You can see more of those flight feathers coming in. By the way, peregrines are all feet. See how big his foot looks? It's because they're walking on a ledge. So if I look at a foot of a red tail versus a foot of a peregrine, peregrines are bigger and longer. Anyway, okay, let's bump up to about 38 days. They're going to fledge around 40, 42. We're getting very close to fledging, very active with wing flapping. They're running around the ledges. You can see just a little bit of down is left sort of in the armpits or the pantaloons or the very top of the head. And then they're going to be taking their first flights. And to use the word flight is being overly generous. It's just a glide down to another level because they don't know how to fly yet. If we're up at Illinois Beach State Park, or say we're at the Waukegan Eyrie, they can land on the beach and they can sit there. They tend to sit in a spot for hours. The problem is if they land on the streets in Chicago. This one was Union Station, so he needs a little briefcase. My favorite was I went to rescue one, and he was in the middle of the street, but they had put all little orange cones around him, waiting for him. But we're gonna, you know, it's basically that they just don't know what to do, and they just went to the bottom level, which was the ground. You know, we're going to, though, pick them up so they don't get into trouble. We can take them to wildlife rehab, like Willowbrook is wonderful and does all our peregrine work. Lincoln Park Zoo used to do some of it. X-ray them, make sure they're fine. If we have access to the Eyrie and we know where it belongs because it's banded, we're going to put them back. If they have to, if it's an unbanded one and I don't know where it came from, you can't risk putting it back, but we can go back to those hacking techniques. And it can stay in Willowbrook's free flight chamber and learn how to fly and hunt there. And then we get closer to the fall, we can let it go. And that works out great. So like those birds we released, once they do their first flights, and we're now, by the way, into June, mid-June into July, you know, learning how to fly, you get very acrobatic with each other, and behavior like that you see in the slide, it works for territorial fighting, it works for food exchanges during courtship, feeding young and that, so they're learning behavior. Parents will feed them less and less, and they'll essentially disperse and go out. And when I say disperse, and you look at the territory from where they were born and then where they go to breed, we tend to see females disperse at a further distance than males. There's a lot of movement around the Midwest and that of immatures, but this is sort of just a dispersal from born to breeding. All right, population's up, doing great. I might say that our goal when we were releasing birds was to have 3 territories for Illinois. We're a plain state. We're not a cliff state. We didn't factor in the whole urban thing. The fact that we're now in routinely over 30 pairs for the state, it's just beyond phenomenal to me. So let's sort of end up with some odd things that we see and that I deal with in the season. And I do love web cameras because it allows people to interact and things they see. If you look at this picture and think in your mind, how many pictures or of these 4 do you think the birds are in trouble? Got that number? It's none. The one on the upper left, I got a lot of calls. Hey, the bird is blind and its eye's not working right. Well, Peregrine's outer eyelid goes from the bottom up. Ours goes from the top down. So it goes opposite way to begin with. And it's covered with a very fine white down. So what looks like a blind bird is just a bird sleeping. Yes, yeah, they lay down when they're incubating, but so the one on the upper right, they lay down when they're hot. They lay down and spread their wings out. You get air flowing. Peregrines lay down. No, they don't stride bottom right. They don't stride like people. They do a hip-hoppy kind of walk. I once remarked to my sister when she was pregnant that she walked like a peregrine. Hey, I got some act for that one. And yeah, and if after beach, they're gonna be in the water and taking a bath. So all those pictures are fine. Webcams, though, do give us sights into behavior that seems to be new. Now that you have an urban population and you have light pollution in the city, are these birds turning towards more nocturnal hunters? So we can see them bringing food into the into the Eyrie via the webcams. But how do I know that's something they caught versus something that they cached and put away? It's something we can keep watching. If you notice where the great horned owl is, if you recognize that ledge that I showed a number of times, that's Rockford. This one scared us because we thought, oh, geez, we're going to have problems with the pair nesting. I don't know what happened to the great horned owl, but we had a fine season after, after this sort of scare of seeing him show up. And we've lost a couple sites due to raccoons. Once raccoon comes in and steals the eggs, the peregrines abandon that. So we lost nest boxes in Romeoville and then Savannah, Illinois, because of coons getting into box. You basically have to take a box down and just move it. It's all part of nature. All right, back to me being able to control. And so here was a pair that you're now at the corner of Wacker and Michigan in Chicago. This is London Guarantee Building. This is going back a little bit. They were using the gutter, so I circled where the egg had rolled to. It was actually nesting where the dandelion was. The building was really excited about it, and this was back when we didn't have very many pairs. Wanted to do what they could. So we'll put up a nest box if it's up to the building to host it, because I can be a consultant, but they have to maintain it and are liable for it and everything down the line. Peregrine, you can see on the urn. So they checked it out. They were in the box. Where did she lay the eggs? Back in her corner. It's just another illustration of they do what they're going to do and what they're set. Some take to trays and boxes, some just don't. Issues that are coming up nowadays with whenever you see something like the poor one in the gutter with the rain, everybody's immediate response is put up a box, put up a tray. But there's a lot of things to consider doing that. Building codes have changed. I can no longer put a box like this. We're in Ukrainian village here in this picture, and just have it weighted by gravel and sandbags. It has to be fixed to the building or some structure on that building, on that roof, whether you're doing it on like a fire scalp ledge, or if we're on a rooftop like this one. My colleague Dylan is actually strapping it to railing that they put out, which worked out nice, but it is a factor in how we can proceed further. All right, so we're helping the birds. When does it come to really helping the people? Peregrines in a flower pot. They look awful cute, but I just sort of, whenever I see this. The biggest problem is not that the people working with them aren't good. And I might say, once you have a peregrine and you have eggs, we have to work through the season. They're protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which means we can't harm the birds, we can't move and destroy the eggs. So I will help you work through the season. If you don't want them when we're done with the season, I can help you prevent them from using the space again. Or if you want, we can make it better for them to use it in the future. The first time I had them in a flower pot, this was my first flower pot. We were in Lakeview. This is sort of near the Lincoln Park area. And very nice family that had that balcony. Yeah, we can give them up. And I thought, okay. And I knew it was going to be a mess, but I didn't think it through far enough. You can see the adults on the railing. Can you see that the chicks are in the flower pot? While they're under that first 3 weeks, they're going to sort of stay there. They're not very mobile yet. But what happens when they get to that mobile age and you start getting this? It got a lot worse, because think about the age of those chicks are about 28 days. They had another, for 2 weeks to go. And yeah, you could host them, but as soon as you're dealing with all the poop on your balcony, we're not happy campers. I've sort of learned to be proactive, and now we go and tarp. We offer to help tarp the balcony. It just makes for an easier cleanup. She's actually in the flower pot in the picture. I want to do it while they're on eggs, because I know she will stay on the eggs, and Stephanie is standing there being a blocker for me just in case, and in case you have an aggressive male, but we can get that all down and just make it. And that's nothing to do with helping the birds. That tarp is to help the people and the residents in the balcony. What we do to help the birds in this situation is to lay gravel down underneath, because another thing that I sigh over in flower pots is you have very wet soil, and it sort of, think of back to that egg in the gutter. You can roll it, but if it's sitting in mud, it's going to be chilled from the bottom size. You have to ask me later when I'm by the study skins about the gravel in this box, because I got another story for you on that one. The problem with these residential buildings is you might be happy, but your neighbor that's a floor above you isn't. And they can be defensive of multiple floors. So usually when it's a situation like this, I actually encourage them, we're going to try to block it off. We'll get through this season. Because think of, if you're on a cliff and there's an avalanche, what is the bird going to do? It's going to just use a nearby ledge next time. Well, the same thing with this. If we can block them from using these, maybe it'll move to another building. The problem with this many balconies is Yeah, you could get this many residents to put in their flower pots over the winter, but there's gonna be one person over there that leaves them out and goes to the Bahamas, and you know the peregrines are going to find that ledge. So it's continual education and working with building management as well as the residents and that. This is an illustration of what I mean by blocking them from using again. Both of these long ledges were used by falcons. I'm going to prevent them from essentially laying in there. The one on the right with all those cones is they had used multiple spots along that ledge, and the building itself was being converted into a hotel. And you're going to have balconies and things that can go out. So I will work with the contractors. I will work with the architects, like a consultant. How is the best way to block them off? Because I would rather help them and do it safely for the birds and let the birds have a chance to nest somewhere else than to end up with some horrible situation going on somewhere in the future. Some sites, this is Waukegan, we're up at the coal plants. We're losing a number of sites. This goes a little bit back to the being on the brink. Are they recovered or are they not? It's a continuous thing that we always have to look at. A lot of the early sites were nest boxes that were put up on power plants, because where were they? They're along the waterways. And I'm talking about Wisconsin and Minnesota. I didn't do it too much, but to me, it was more a reactive thing. But we're closing down our coal plants. And so we no longer have access to the building or the box. And that's the same thing in like shutting down the balcony. Where are those pairs going to move to? All right, a couple fun things. Because you're birders, I can throw this stuff in. This was my favorite Peregrine ID call. I had somebody who took the L in every morning and said, I keep seeing it on this building. I keep seeing it at different places of the building. And yeah, it's brown. It's got the streaking and it's all the right plumage and blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, I'm going out in the neighborhood. I'll go check out what it is. Do you have something in your mind all over the building? They were blasted great horned owls all over a church. But that was a fun one. But if you look at all the species that have been mistaken for peregrines, all these back there. So anyway, I brought a few. It's sort of leading me into what I have in the back of the room. I brought a couple study skins. Some of you have been looking at them. There's 7 there. 3 of them are peregrines. Figure out which are the peregrines, which are not. And that. Just to wrap it up with a little bit of the couple of things we're looking at research-wise to get a little serious for now is in collecting all those addled eggs. So over the last 20 years, and I'm getting from the other Midwest states, I have close to 250 egg sets from around, and I'm seeing a fair amount of embryonic mortality. So we've been doing analysis on trying to measure the eggs to see if there's something different. You were going back to eggshell thinning. We've looked at some heavy metals and that. We're going to do the organochlorines, the contaminant levels. Something that's showing up in peregrines are flame retardant byproducts. It's PBDEs if you want the initials, but it's your stuff breaking down in the waterway, and then your shorebirds eat it, making up the system that way. The cool thing, measuring eggs, see how you can do it now? You used to have to do it in the 70s by measuring around the hole, or there's a formula that you could use with the size of the egg and the weight and blah, blah, blah. But now you could put a little ball bearing in the hole because you've blown out the insides, and there's a magnet on that pedestal, and the computer is measuring the distance between the little ball bearing and the magnet. And I can roll the egg, so I can not only measure around the middle, I can measure on the apexes on the end. And by the way, the apexes are always thicker, and it makes sense because if you're rolling an egg, you're rolling it this way instead of end over end, so that apexes get the least wear. We will collect prey. Have an idea what it's got in its talons? I will give you a clue. It's the #1 thing on that card. And you guys can try to do 1 through 5. I'll give you a clue on 5. The feathers are actually blue. It's hard to see on that. So your answer, there you go, left to right. So you had cedar waxwings, and then chimney swift, yellow-bellied sapsucker, a cuckoo, and then an eastern bluebird. They love cuckoos. They love cuckoos. They love flickers. Blue jays, the slow, straight flyers tend to be a great prey source for them. But we're also collecting prey feathers, not just to, you want to look at the prey species so you can monitor and say, oh, if it's feeding on neotropical migrants and we're still exporting DDT to other countries, is that still making it in the system? Which is why we're looking at in the eggshells that we're finding with the embryos. But also we're collecting the feathers because we can look at the isotopes of the prey and we can learn about prey. And those isotopes will tell me where that bird was in the world when it grew that feather. And last thing, and this is going to make the request for your $20 due donation cheap, and you're going to give it right away because you donate to that instead of here. One project I'd like to do is to look at satellite trackers. They now work off your cell phones. Everybody's got a cell phone in their pocket, right? And so actually this fall, I'm doing a workshop where you're learning to harness raptors for the satellite trackers. And I can do it a little bit with photos. This is the female actually up in Rockford, and through webcams and that, we've been able to see her, that popping around movement and her moving between iris, even in the winter, even though she had mates. But what more can we learn once we would get the a satellite tracker on? So the plug is for bird, we're talking $3,000 per bird. So you got all the money in the world and you don't know what to do with it, or you win the lotto tomorrow. You're like, oh, I'll call Mary and give her some money for satellite trackers. I'm here for you. But so that's sort of it. I'm going to leave it on this slide simply because then when we go away, it has the website you can go to and look at it on Facebook. I do want to say the Peregrine program isn't me, it's all you guys. It's all the people in Rockford that watch the cameras. It's all the people in the buildings that talk to me. I'm just one little person and we're all volunteers, including me. This is a sort of ad hoc group that's together that the passion is peregrines and following them. So I'm grateful in the world to all these people that support the peregrines. And it's just been a wonderful 40 years with them. So, all right, cool. And then come find me in the back. Study skins. I wrote a book. I got a copy back there. You can look at that. All right.